All right, we're gonna pick up where we left off, looking at the crisis of the Republic and what's going to lead to the fall of the Republic. We were last talking about the Gracchi crisis when the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, were both murdered after proposing land reform in Rome to deal with the latifundia. And this revolt is going to culminate in a civil war in the Roman Republic, and the civil war has to be put down. In order to restore control, three powerful men in the Republic, Julius Caesar, perhaps the most powerful general in all the Roman army, who was famous for extending Roman control into Gaul, what we know today as France, Crassus, a wealthy Roman senator in general, and Pompey in general. These three men use the military essentially to bring order. Once they bring order, they suspended the rules of the Republic and basically put in a three-person dictatorship they called the Triumvirate that they said was necessary to get the Republic through the crises. And these three men ruled together. The first Triumvirate is going to be the beginning of the end for the Republic because all three of these men are ambitious men, and all three of them have the loyalty of the military. The military is the key because that's their way to project power and take control for themselves. And all three are going to make this attempt in one way, shape, or form. The triumvirate is going to be short-lived, and it's eventually going to collapse through conflict between these three men who thought at one time they could rule together, but as they all become overly ambitious, are going to essentially betray each other. Crassus is the first to be removed from the triumvirate. He was off fighting, trying to extend Roman control into Mesopotamia, an area the Romans constantly, throughout their empire, tried to expand into in the Middle East and never were able to. That left Julius Caesar and Pompey. And Pompey becomes the most probably ambitious of the two in his desire to rule for himself. Julius Caesar had gone back to Gaul, to France, to continue his conquest of France with his army and become incredibly popular with his army. Pompey stayed in Rome and started to conspire against Julius Caesar and planned to have him removed. So here we can see Gaul and the extension of the Roman Empire, much of it under Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is going to lay the first expeditions into what we know today as England, as the Roman Empire extends in there. So you can see around the time of the First Triumvirate, this is the empire of the Roman Republic. It controls all the entirety of the Mediterranean and large portions of the Black Sea as well. And there's some areas that are still in contention. One of them is Egypt, for instance, is a client state. It's not directly controlled, but it's controlled by people that have agreed to be kind of an alliance and do what Rome says. And we'll come back to Egypt in the second triumvirate. So Julius Caesar's in Gaul when Pompey is conspiring in the city of Rome to somehow get Julius Caesar removed and take power for himself. So when Caesar realized that Pompey, who had called him back to Rome, and when he recalled him, he asked Julius Caesar to come alone without his troops. Julius Caesar predicts that Pompey is trying to kill him. And so what Caesar does is he decides to beat Pompey to the punch. And he convinces his soldiers and men to march with him back to Rome, crossing into northern Italy, crossing the Rubicon River on January 10th, 49 BCE, and invading Italy itself. So in 49 BCE, we have a Roman army invade Rome. And he chased Pompey out of Rome, and Pompey will eventually be caught up and eliminated. But when Julius Caesar's there, Julius Caesar makes the argument, with the support of the army, this crisis had been so terrible that it was going to take a long time for Rome to sort out the crisis, so they needed a dictator, which was part of the Roman Republican government. But dictators were only supposed to serve for 6 months. He makes the argument that he should be placed on the throne as dictator for life. We can see the Rubicon River, which Julius Caesar crossed when his invasion of Italy. It's commonly said that when you reach a point of no return, that it's to cross a Rubicon, throwing back to the idea of Julius Caesar's invasion of his own land. So he puts himself as his dictator for life, and he basically becomes an absolute ruler with total power over the Republic. But he never declares himself a monarch. And so when we look at this time period, it's kind of a twilight period for the Republic. The Republic hasn't necessarily died, but it's been placed on hold, and there's a dictator that's taking all power that's like a monarch but hasn't quite declared himself a monarch. And so this is when people start to conspire against Julius Caesar. But Julius Caesar was really, really popular with the commoners because one of the things that he did was he instituted land reform. He tried to address some of the issues that the Gracchus brothers were trying to address and deal with massive poverty that led to civil war in the first place. And the common people could care less that he was a dictator for life. We have to keep in mind the Roman Republic was essentially an aristocracy. It was almost a dictatorship of the aristocrats, even though there wasn't a monarch. And so it didn't matter to them who was calling the shots. What mattered to them was bread and butter issues, and Julius Caesar was delivering for them, and so he was incredibly popular. But among the senators in the Senate who felt like their power was removed, and in many had lost wealth under the reforms of Julius Caesar, he was seen as this tyrannical dictator that had to be removed. So famously, two senators, Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius, conspired to kill Julius Caesar. And on March 15th, 44 BCE, famously coined by Shakespeare as the Ides of March, Julius Caesar visits the Senate on the Senate floor where Brutus and Cassius stab him to death right in front of all the other senators and bathe in his blood and say that they had saved the Republic. They truly believed they were saviors of Roman's Republic and the killers of tyranny. What they found, though, was the reaction was quite different. The reaction to the death of Julius Caesar gave rise to conflict, civil war, and um, in the rise of the Second Triumvirate, because this civil war came into power, and we see three powerful men join forces to once again restore order. Those three men was the nephew and adopted son of Caesar. His name was Octavian. He was only about 18 years old. Mark Antony, a powerful general and a loyal ally of Julius Caesar, and a powerful but older politician named Lepidus. They united as the second triumvirate that would bring control to Rome. But once again, this triumvirate was full of divisions and ambitious men, and no one was more ambitious than Octavian, the young Octavian who saw himself as the heir of Julius Caesar, although Julius never declared a monarch. In Octavian's mind, he should get to be the new ruler of Rome, and he was beginning to conspire against the other two. He convinced Lepidus. Well, before we get there, this triumvirate actually physically divides up the empire in what areas they're going to control. Octavian took Rome in the west, Lepidus controlled North Africa, and Mark Antony took the east in Egypt. And in Egypt, Mark Antony began to be courted by the last Ptolemaic ruler of Egypt, Cleopatra. The side note of history during the Second Triumvirate and why Mark Antony is in Egypt is that Cleopatra at one point had a relationship with Julius Caesar and had a son with Julius Caesar named Caesarion. And now she's having a relationship with this general Mark Antony. When historians look at the behavior of Cleopatra, she seems to be using her femininity, her attractiveness, her sexuality to her political advantage. Cleopatra is really scared of losing Egypt to the growing Roman Empire. She's loosely allied herself to Egypt, but never has given up her throne to Egypt. She's loosely allied Egypt to Rome, but never given up her throne to Rome. But she's very scared that the Roman Empire is going to gobble her up. And she sees this division in the Second Triumvirate as a way to hold on to Egypt and her territory. And she uses Mark Antony to her advantage. So two important relationships with two important figures. It's also important to note that living in Egypt is the son of Julius Caesar. And so we're going to pick up on this conflict that tears the Second Triumvirate apart next.